Okay, so exceptions are going to happen. No matter what you do, you're going to hit into exceptions because a lot of the code that you're going to use, you don't control. A lot of the input to your programs, you don't control. Remember, when you write programs, you're going to have to deal with users who may not follow instructions, may not read the input boxes, or may just not know how your program works. So they'll just test random values. So you're going to have to deal with bad input, incorrect input, what have you. And so in Java, exceptions help you deal with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a little small toy application that will divide strings, right? So the strings obviously have to be converted to numbers and then divided. And as you could already imagine, the amount of problems are high, right? So let's go take a look at the code and see what we got to do. All right, so in this lesson, we're just going to implement a simple math.divide class, method. So if you open up main, there is just one method or one class in here called myMath. Now, myMath, right here, you need to implement divide. Now, obviously, I have the solution blurred out. One thing I want to note here is the fact that this is a static method. Now, a static method means it's part of the class, not the object. The reason we created a static method in this case is because I think it makes more sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense to create a myMath object because you're not really storing any state. This is what I would call is like a utility function. So you would use it as a utility. So if we go over here to myMath test, we can actually see how we use it. So we don't notice there's no new. We just say myMath.divide, and that is how we use that function. So you can see here where if we go back over here in the myMath.divide method, it takes strings. So I'm going to pass a 10 and a 2, and it internally will convert it to an integer and then divide. So I can assert equal. The result should be 5. 10 divided by 2 is 5. Okay. One of the cool things. So that's the good input. Another way to think about that, that's in industry, you'd call that the happy path, meaning that the path that you intend to work. But look at all these exceptions. All right, so let's talk about this. So one of the cool things about using a test framework is you can actually test for an expected exception, right? So I could say that in this test, I could say my expected exception is going to be of the arithmetic exception class. So I'm expecting this to fail, right? So this right here, so it's just kind of weird, right? Because I'm actually saying that this should fail, right? Like I'm testing for failure, so my test will succeed because my code failed. So it's a little weird, but it's in this case we want it, right? If we have 10 divided by 0, we expect an exception, right? So we could say this is our exception. Okay, and again, okay, here we go. 10.2 divided by 2. 10.2 is a float. It is absolutely not allowed, right? This is integer only. So again, we are expecting an exception. Same thing. We have 10 and then 2 divided by 2. That's, whatever that is. Just like that. You just try to imagine everything a user might put in there. Right, and here we go. A user puts a string, foo and bar. Obviously, those foo and bar is not a number. And how about empty strings, right? So we say, okay, what if we just pass an empty? Then we have a number format exception. So notice most of the exceptions are number formatting exceptions. Where when I divide by 0, that's an arithmetic exception. So if we go down here and then null. Okay, what happens if I pass a null? So these tests are really cool because now we don't have to do some convoluted custom testing framework to try to figure out if our exceptions are working. It just works. And the nice part about that is we go over here, we run all the tests, and we can see that everything passes. So let's look at what happens when we remove this exception clause. Right, we'll just remove it, delete it. And then we'll run, I want to run just this test but divided by 0. So I find it, test, and I just click this button right here. I want to run just that test. And you can see that now I have an exception, right? And my test failed. See, look, my test failed. I get a math divide, java.lang arithmetic exception divide by 0. But that's actually expected, right? That's what I want to happen. I want it to throw an exception. So that's where I say, okay, well, that's what I wanted to that's what I intended to do. So I click play, and did I save it? Let's see here. Let's go back over here. Test divide by 0. Oh, oops. There we go. I had the wrong class in there. There we go, and I click there, and now it's back to green. So that's some cool things. So the cool takeaways of this is number one, learning how to deal with exceptions learning how to deal with exceptions, and probably the most critical, or the more important is look how you can deal with exceptions in your unit test code. So leverage this in your future. If you have future labs that may throw exceptions, you should write a test for it and test that an exception is thrown when it should be thrown. Right now, you shouldn't. To note, if this say that we have this. Right. So let's actually see what happens okay. So this is valid, right? Math divided by 10. This is valid. So that's what happens. We're saying we expected this. See what happens if we do this. So if we click play, we should see a failure, and there we go. So method mymath.test should have thrown. It's hard to see that. You probably can't read that because the text is but it says should have thrown an exception of type arithmetic exception and didn't, right? So this is kind of cool. It's actually, it's actually telling us that hey, you told us it was supposed to be dividing, you throw an exception and it didn't. So that's another cool thing. Let's go ahead and we're back to passing. So there you go. So once you write, so I would suggest you write your unit test first, then complete the My Math class, and here's some example output that you might see. You might want to take a look at integer.percent. That's a little hint that can help you in this particular program. So, and again, once you finish, complete the retrospective, push your code, and that's it. Happy hacking.